This guy that recently jumped from 39 kilometers up in the air. My wife had to look up his name. I think it was Felix something Baumgartner. Yeah, I was just imagining if standing. Well, I'm afraid of heights, so it's really a stupid parallel. But standing up there, 39 kilometers up, looking down. So if this was us, what would we see? Yeah, we would see the Earth. But if we look closer, maybe when we jumped and we got like the first kilometer down and we could start seeing the Earth, what would we see? My guess is that we would see like what's in the end it's going to be an iceberg. But what would we see would be a globe in crisis. Well, we started out calling it financial crisis in the end of 2008. Then we recognized, oh, it's bigger than just financial crisis. So basically what we call it here is crisis. And flying with Baumgartner down on Earth here, I guess the first thing we would see would be these crises in terms of jobs moving around where they leave, creating unemployment. Altogether, actually creates more unemployment than we create employment these days. I think we would also see that we have crisis in environmental terms. Look at big cities. Kotka is beautiful here, but go to Delhi, go to New York, go to other big cities, and you can say that it's crisis also in logistic terms, in environmental terms. And you could go and you can see, well, we got crisis, but on different levels. And actually, when we get even closer to the Earth here, I would suggest that what we see when we see beneath the crisis is something else. Because I don't like the word crisis. I think this is how the global situation expresses itself, but what's beneath that, for me, is transformation. And transformation on 3 levels. The first, of course, is the economic transformation. And I think we all know where is wealth created these days. It's unfortunately not in our part of the world. We see growth in Asia, we see it in Latin America, we see our part of the world, Europe and the US. We don't have much growth, and if we look ahead, basically all economists would expect that we will see more growth in Asia, Latin America than we see in our part of the world. We do see economic crisis, at least, or not the least, in Southern Europe. And we could ask ourselves, so why? And my suggestion is that we have messed up with what could be called the wealth equation. So if we have to understand the economic part here, maybe we should just remind ourselves what is the wealth equation. Well, the wealth equation is that wealth is a function of the resources we have. That could be in old days land and forest, but it's also capital, and not the least human capital, it's knowledge. So that's our resources times our productivity, how well we use our resources. Basically, this is what would create wealth. But we've been messing with that equation. What is a big challenge in Greece? It's not that they don't have resources. They have plenty of resources. But the way they have utilized the resources and the wealth they were thinking this created didn't work out. So they had to borrow a lot of money. The way they used the resources, among others, was to say, when you reach the age of 54, you are so tired and worn out, you have to go for retirement. You have to get a pension. Still, they thought that as a country, they could afford a higher level of wealth than actually the function of their resources and their productivity. And this we have been messing around with in quite some countries. In Asia, they messed around this the other way around. They had a lot of resources. Just think of how the population has grown in Asia and Latin America, they've actually been fairly productive compared to the level of wealth. So they actually created a surplus. That's why the Chinese are lending money to the US. So this is not something that came about in 2008. That's why it's not a crisis. That's why it's a transformation. So going with Baumgartner closer to the globe, yes, it's crisis, but what's beneath the crisis? It's an economic transformation, because basically we have to adjust the wealth equation. So wealth actually equals the resources times the productivity. But going closer, I suggest that this is not the only one. On top of this, there's a political transformation going on. Denmark hosted the climate summit some years ago. Unfortunately, not with great success, I think was the final judgment. And part of the reason, well, maybe some lousy leaders of the meeting, our prime minister, but also that they suddenly realized how much the political global order has changed, how much the votes and the views of the Chinese matter. They thought, oh, Obama himself flying in to this World Summit, it's going to solve everything. Not, because Obama doesn't have the political power that US presidents would have 10 years ago, as a reflection of an economic transition. And we're going to see this more and more. So the economic transformation mirrors itself in the political transformation. We will see that in the UN, in the OECD, in the, what was a economist, I think was called the G7. Now it's what? G8, G10, G20? Whoa! It's a reflection on the political level of this economic transformation. And let me just add the third and last one. I think there's an equally important transformation of, let's call it the value system. The value system is what gives legitimacy to the political and economic one. The value system is what we think is right or wrong. Religion is a value system. Religion tells you what is right or wrong. Ideology is a value system. It tells you who's good and who's bad, who are friends, who are enemies, what's good and bad. And we can go beyond that. And the value system, if we look at values, say, 10 years ago, and still remember we are coming down here with Baumgarten and try to capture what's the essence of the whole globe here. The value system, I would say, maybe the last 30 years, maybe until just a few years ago, was characterized by greed. Greed was acceptable globally to an extent I don't believe it will be in the future. Let's just take greed with environmental resources. Greed in the sense that we were thinking that we could just use natural resources without replacing them. Yes, today we talk a lot about green energy. I come from Denmark. We have a long tradition for green energy. But take the global look, and probably you would have found, you've seen a lot of acceptance of greed in terms of our use of natural resources. I think greed has been characteristic for, say, also the financial sector. Finance people who had these enormous bonuses, we admired as heroes. That was fantastic. They made so much money and individuals could take so much value out. And that was fine, that was acceptable in general. I don't believe that it is anymore. I think our value system is transforming. I think what we will see is not greed. I think we will instead value values as generosity. That you put in more than you take. I think that companies that show themselves generous, we award them by buying their products, by working in their factories or offices. I think that countries that are generous to other countries, I see that they will be rewarded by trade agreements, by migration forth and back. An old friend of mine is a business school professor in the US. His name is Michael E. Porter. And I think everybody who's ever been to a business school knows who Michael Porter is. I happened to work with him in the 1980s, and was a great guy, great thinker. But up through the 90s, when I got occupied by issues like what's the social responsibility of corporations, CSR, and I talked with Michael Porter about this and was like, what are you talking about? The business of business is business. Then you make money because you have a good strategy and you execute well. Then you spend money on philanthropy. And Michael Porter actually done great work, you should know, on philanthropy. And he earned shitloads of money. And he spent actually a lot on inner city social projects. Now a year ago, an article came out from Michael Porter and one of his colleagues, which was interesting, among others, because it was Michael Porter, this strategy, the business of business is business. And he suddenly started talking about shared value creation. He says, if we think in the corporate world that we can only produce value for our shareholders, we lose legitimacy. We have to see that we are here to create value for our shareholders, yes, but also for our employees, for our customers, for our local societies. So that's his thinking around shared value creation. I see this as just one indicator that things are changing, that greed is less acceptable than it was before, that generosity is awarded. And I see this as a transformation on kind of same level as the economic and the political transformation. So having the big picture, to me, no, it's not a crisis, that's just a symptom. It's a transformation. And we have to understand the fundamentals of that transformation if we are to diagnose and act correctly whenever it's in the Nordics, wherever it's in Finland, wherever it's in Kotka.